In 1955, something horrifying happened at a cemetery in Indonesia. The local police chief, Heru, called in Budiman, a magazine editor who investigated paranormal cases. The two opened a door deep inside the cemetery and froze at what they saw. Countless dried-up corpses were kneeling in perfect rows. Every single one of them was bowing to a woman in white with a veil covering her face. From the marks in the dirt, it was clear no one had dug up the bodies. They had crawled out of their own graves. When officials found out what happened, they ordered Heru to keep quiet so the public wouldn't panic. But Heru was sure this wasn't over. He asked Budiman to use his media connections to investigate in secret. If they couldn't report the story openly, they'd start a small newspaper and slowly put the clues out there. 30 years later, after being haunted by the case for decades, Heru took his own life. Before he died, he mailed Budiman all the evidence, recordings, and photos he had collected over the years. Among the files, Budiman found a photo of an apartment building. In one recording, Heru kept warning that something terrible was about to happen there. The apartment complex sat on low-lying land near the coast, with almost nothing else around it. 3 years earlier, Bar had moved there with his 3 children. His oldest daughter was Anna, and her 2 younger brothers were Tony and Bondi. Their family once included their mother, Mawarni, and their youngest brother, Ian. But Mawarni suddenly died, and Ian mysteriously disappeared that very same day. The family moved here hoping for a fresh start, but 3 years later, their lives were still anything but normal. Their father, Bar, left early every morning and came home late at night. Whenever he returned, he locked a suitcase inside a cabinet. None of the kids knew what he was up to. Anna could never understand why the government had built apartments in such a remote, low-lying area. One bad storm could easily flood the entire first floor, and the neighbors weren't exactly normal either. Even if you were just taking out the trash, you might find someone standing in the dark, staring at you. That night, the weather forecast warned that a massive storm would hit the next day, putting low-lying areas at serious risk of flooding. Wisnu, the boy who lived next door to Anna's family, happened to be taking out the trash. Wisnu's father had died years ago, but just as he was about to head back inside, he heard his father calling his name from behind him. Wisnu turned around and saw his father standing at the far end of the hallway. His face was completely rotten, and he just kept calling Wisnu's name. Terrified, Wisnu ran home and immediately turned his father's framed photo face down on the table. At the same time, the TV in Anna's apartment turned on by itself, and there on the screen was her dead mother, Mawarni. And this was only the beginning of the nightmare. The next day, a resident waiting for the elevator accidentally dropped some coins down the elevator shaft. A few little girls saw it happen. When the elevator suddenly got stuck between floors, the girls climbed into the shaft to grab the coins. But the second they went in, the elevator suddenly dropped. More than a dozen people were killed. With the heavy rain making rescue efforts impossible, the bodies had to be kept inside the apartment building for the time being. Even stranger, Bar had also been caught in the accident, yet somehow walked away with only minor injuries. Wisnu's mother was killed too. His father was already dead, and now he was completely alone, so Anna went over to stay with him. Meanwhile, Budiman learned from Heru's files that something terrible might happen at the apartment building that very night. He immediately tried to get there, but with the storm coming, no driver was willing to risk it. Then, someone told him there had already been a deadly elevator accident at the building earlier that day. Budiman knew the elevator accident might only be the beginning. Afraid the storm would flood the building, some residents had already left for the city. Most of them, though, stayed behind. Anna's younger brother, Tony, had always had a crush on Tari, a girl who lived downstairs. The storm shut down the buses, so Tari couldn't get to her job at the bar. Worried she might get scared being alone, Tony brought her a radio. Tari was listening to music while doing her homework when the radio suddenly started playing the sound of her own voice screaming for help. It sounded like she was being tortured, crying and begging someone to save her. Tari was too terrified to move. Only when the radio shut itself off did she finally look up. That's when she heard a noise somewhere in the room. She followed the sound and saw another version of herself, folded in half and stuffed inside a storage shelf. Tari bolted out of the room and ran straight into Tony, who was still nearby. They went back inside together, but the body on the shelf was gone. Tari told Tony to get rid of the radio. But the second he tossed it down the garbage chute, the entire building lost power. Bondi and a few of his friends headed downstairs to see what caused the blackout. When they reached the first floor, they saw rainwater already pouring into the building. The flooding had probably knocked out the power. Then Bondi noticed something else. The whole building was way too quiet. Hundreds of people lived there, yet he couldn't hear a single person talking. Meanwhile, after leaving Tari's apartment, Tony ran into a religious teacher named Mahmoud in the stairwell. Several married couples had died together in the elevator accident earlier that day. Mahmoud was going to their apartments to close the windows, and he asked Tony to come with him. But after checking only 2 apartments, Mahmoud started feeling sick and had to stop. Tony would have to check the rest by himself. Tony headed up to the 13th floor. An elderly couple had lived in apartment 1303, and both of them had died in the elevator accident. Just as Tony was about to close the window, his match suddenly went out. When he lit another one, both corpses behind him opened their eyes and stared straight at him. Luckily, Tony didn't turn around. By the time he finally looked back, both bodies were back to normal. After leaving the apartment, Tony ran into his friend Dino in the hallway. Someone had somehow knocked a hole through the wall of Dino's apartment, connecting it to the empty unit next door. The opening was too small for Dino, so he asked Tony to crawl through. Inside, Tony found a photo album linked to some kind of cult. On the table was a record that had belonged to his mother, Mawarni. That meant whoever had been using this apartment not only knew Mawarni, but also knew about Anna's family and their past. Tony knew something was seriously wrong. With Dino's help, he quickly crawled back out. Meanwhile, Tari was alone again when something else happened. A flash of lightning lit up the bedroom, revealing a woman standing inside. But when Tari turned to look, the woman was gone. Tari got more terrified by the second and decided to leave. Just as she reached the door, she ran into Mahmoud. Seeing how scared she was, Mahmoud told her to calm down and pray. Tari took his advice. But just as she was about to pray, everything around her suddenly turned old and run down. Even her mother's grave appeared right there in the living room. The moment Tari started praying, several corpses gathered around her and began praying with her. They didn't disappear until Tony and Dino arrived. Unfortunately, other people in the building weren't so lucky. Ali's younger sister Weena was one of the girls who had climbed into the elevator shaft earlier that day, and somehow she had survived. That night, a strange sound lured Weena out of her apartment. She saw the friends who had died in the accident, then noticed a blurry figure stepping into the elevator. Thinking it was one of her friends, she followed, but the elevator had never been repaired. Weena stepped straight into the empty shaft and fell to her death. Elsewhere, Tony, Dino, and Tari met up with Anna in the hallway. Anna noticed that many of the people in the cult album also appeared in old photos of Mawarni. That meant their mother had been connected to the cult, and these people had been watching the family for years. They also started to suspect Bar, especially since he was always locking that suitcase away. Determined to find out the truth, Anna secretly opened it. Inside were more than 100 human fingers. Horrified, everyone decided they had to get out of the building that very night. But just as they were getting ready to leave, Anna suddenly remembered that Bondi was still somewhere inside. Dino and Tari headed downstairs to find a way out, while Anna and Tony went back upstairs to look for Bondi. At that moment, Bondi and his friends had entered another apartment, where they found records showing that the entire complex had been built over an old cemetery. Then Ian suddenly appeared in front of Bondi. Ian had been missing for 3 years, and everyone had assumed he was dead. Something about him immediately felt wrong to Bondi, so he panicked and ran out. When Anna and Tony arrived, they couldn't believe what they were seeing either. At the same time, the bodies of the elevator victims being kept inside the building suddenly sat up. One by one, they disappeared into the darkness. Anna couldn't decide whether they should take Ian with them. Ian claimed he had no idea what had happened during the 3 years he was missing. All he remembered was falling asleep after he disappeared, then waking up here. Bondi still didn't trust him. He was convinced this boy wasn't really their brother. But Anna couldn't bear the thought of losing Ian again. She had spent years blaming herself for what happened to him. Meanwhile, Dino and Tari reached the lower floor. The first floor was already underwater, and live electrical wires had fallen into the floodwater. There was no way through. With no other choice, they headed back upstairs. As Dino climbed the stairs, he saw the veiled woman in white standing ahead of him. He slowly moved closer, but the woman suddenly vanished, leaving only a white dress behind. Dino picked it up and tossed it into the flooded floor below. But the second the white fabric left his hand, it floated right back up and wrapped itself around his head. Dino fought to pull it off. Then, a huge pale face suddenly appeared right in front of him. Before he could react, a metal spike shot through his throat from behind. Tari had no choice but to run upstairs alone. Halfway up, she came face to face with the dead elevator victims, now standing in the darkness and staring at her. Tari screamed, and the woman in white was already coming up behind her. Luckily, Tari found Mahmoud on that floor. Mahmoud stepped toward the stairs to see what was there, but an invisible force suddenly twisted his neck and killed him. With nowhere else to go, Tari climbed into the garbage chute and hid. As she quietly prayed, the small metal door above her slowly opened. Meanwhile, Anna was leading Tony, Bondi, and Ian downstairs. But the moment they entered the hallway, their father, Bar, blocked their way. Bar told his children that everything he had done was meant to protect them. The second he finished speaking, cult members and the resurrected accident victims began coming out of the darkness. Everyone scattered. In the chaos, someone hit Anna from behind and knocked her unconscious. When she woke up, she saw young Ian standing among the cult members, giving them orders. Bar was captured by the cult and brutally killed right in front of Anna. Tony and Bondi were next. Only then did Anna realize Bondi had been right all along. Whatever Ian was now, he was no longer the little brother they remembered. Just as Anna lost all hope, the door was suddenly kicked open. Several cult members went down, and Budaman finally appeared. Using the information Heru had left behind, Budaman used a ritual charm he had brought with him to temporarily drive away the woman in white. He rescued Anna, Tony, and Bondi, then led them downstairs. Budiman had already prepared a small boat, and the group finally escaped the apartment building. As they got away, Budiman revealed the truth behind everything. Bar had once been a police officer. Years earlier, one of his investigations had led him to this cult. Bar wanted Mawarni to become a famous singer, and he also wanted a complete family of his own. So he made a deal with an evil spirit. Mawarni's success and the births of all 4 children came from that deal. But there was a price. The youngest of their 4 children, Ian, would eventually have to be sacrificed to the evil spirit. Bar later regretted what he had done and tried to break the deal. The cult told him there was only one way to get Ian back. He would have to offer 1,000 human lives in Ian's place. Desperate to protect his children and make up for his mistake, Bar began secretly killing people. The fingers inside the suitcase were how he kept track of his victims. Bar believed that once he gave the cult what they wanted, he could finally free his family from the evil spirit. What he didn't know was that once Ian was taken, the deal could never be undone. At the end of the movie, the story returns to the supposedly empty apartment next door to Dino's place. A mysterious couple named Darmina and Batara walk inside. At first glance, they look like ordinary residents, but they're actually members of the cult, pulling the strings from behind the scenes. Decades have passed, yet the 2 of them have barely aged. The same cult that Budaman and Heru spent years investigating had been under their control all along. The apartment building, the elevator accident, the resurrected bodies, and even Ian's return may have all been part of their plan. For Anna and her family, escaping the building doesn't mean the nightmare is over. The real horror is only beginning